go live now. Welcome everybody to the Gamification Revolution. I'm your host, Gabe Zickerman. It's a lovely and sunny, newly spring day in New York City. It's episode number 10. And as always, we're here with an expert in the field of creating engagement, Michelle Katics, founder of BankersLab. Hi, Michelle, how are you?
Hi.
And luckily for all of us, through the magic and the power of the internet and Spreecast, Michelle is joining us from beautiful Chiang Mai, Thailand, where she lives, which is one of my favorite places. And for those of you who know, I'm a big food nerd. It's a great place to eat. As always here on the Gamification Revolution, you can ask questions of Michelle or myself by clicking one of the buttons. It's a camera, submit question. You'll have them all right here. You can join us in the chat, ask us stuff. If you've got a camera, we'll bring you online, assuming the technology works. And you can ask your questions directly of Michelle or me. And as always, you can join us and 60 other folks in April in San Francisco for Gamification Summit. Find out more information at gsummit.com and use the code GREV to save $200 on your registration. So, Michelle, tell us about BankersLab.
Sure. BankersLab is actually focused on education, training, and learning. And so when we talk about gamification, it's very specific to education and learning. To be specific, in the financial industry, there is some gamification on the consumer side in terms of the banking customer experience, but we're focused on actually training the bankers to kind of get to the next level to provide a richer set of tools for them. So in that realm, we kind of operate on two levels in terms of gamification. One is serious games, so serious numerical simulations. And the second is really gamifying the standard types of training that you would think of, like mobile learning, classroom learning, etc.
So bankers, judging by the global financial crisis, bankers probably need training just as much, and if not more, than any of the other professions in the world. Is the kind of, are the sort of training modalities in the banking sphere just like any other enterprise? Are they kind of just as boring, just as dry, or are things like more prone to be fun and interesting in that side of the world?
I'll be honest with you. Sometimes the things that people have to learn in banking are not the most fascinating things. Take compliance, for example. So what we've seen is a lot of mobile learning applications come out, which is great because it caters to current lifestyles, bite-sized learning chunks, all that great stuff. But what we found is that if you just take really boring compliance information and you had boring PowerPoint and you push it into a mobile app, it's still just as boring. So, for example, in mobile learning, we're not really interested in doing it unless we can actually gamify it. And so we're really just trying to experiment with that. We're constantly trying new things in terms of different gamification mechanics there.
Well, so this is a question though, which I think maybe, I think dogs all of us who work on gamifying experiences. You're talking about it here. There's stuff that you've got to learn. There's stuff you've got to do that just isn't that interesting, huh? Like compliance with financial regulation. Just like no matter what we do, it's not going to be interesting. So how do we get someone to actually engage with that material?
Yeah, I think what we've seen is, I'll be honest, you have a lot of type A banker personalities, which is great because throwing a little competition in absolutely gets people engaged. So that one is actually pretty simple. So for example, when we do our lab games, which are serious game simulation, in terms of gamification mechanics, competition is actually number one. I would say it's the number one gamification mechanic. It's easy to put in there, and I would say it drives and fuels a lot of the engagement. So that's good. And I think some of the personality types we're dealing with really jump in there and get going when they're working in teams and competing against each other.
Was that kind of highly competitive construct? Was that sort of surprising to you? Because it doesn't seem particularly surprising when you say bankers competition.
Yeah, that's right. What I think some of the things that surprised us were typically you think, okay, I'm trying to teach people how to do something technical in a serious game. This is a simulation. But some of what you saw people learn was actually teamwork. So in our simulation games, the serious games, people work in teams competing against each other. And what you see is that teamwork element, which frankly, I started out trying to teach subject matter, pretty technical stuff, frankly, and then to see these sort of extra outcomes, which are fabulous, which have to do with leadership and teamwork. And frankly, some of the things that people who are technical, they have to develop. And if they don't, then, that's when you have, management failures, when people can't work as a team and step up and take leadership. So you sort of combine it all in one package.
So my question, though, to you is on that question of those extra outcomes like leadership and teamwork and so on. When companies bring you in, or when you bring the BankersLab solution to those companies, do they actually care about that, or do they really just care about, like, you got to do this compliance training, got to do this sexual harassment training, check, 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 check?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and in fact, what we have seen is people really want both. Because I think people now understand that to be successful as an organization, you've got to get all the technical stuff right, but you've got to get the management, leadership, and I'll be honest, some of the failures we've seen in the industry have been that, let's say, two big departments, say business and risk, and banking is your classic clash between departments. Business has to grow, risk has to control everything, and guess what? They don't get along. So we do something really simple. In gamification, this is really simple. You just put you have these teams and you make sure you got a business guy and a risk guy together, and they have a long-term goal in the game of maximizing income over, say, a 2-year outcome. And suddenly, both of those individuals with a joint objective suddenly find a way to get along. And we've seen that to be really valuable, and I'm happy to say that people really see that value. Although, to be frank, to invest in these tools, they also need to make sure that they're getting the technical skill sets driven in there.
So that's very interesting, right? It kind of puts you in the position of having to sometimes maybe make a more assumptive statement about what it is that people really need, rather than just what it is that potentially the clients want. And Seamus, who is a regular viewer participant on the show, is talking about in the chat here about having done some similar things kind of at JP Morgan, and he talks about how some of these putting people together helps clear up kind of misunderstandings or business process conflicts or challenges between different groups. I guess my one question for you is, do you know if that actually translates into the real world? So when people are put in the game, you construct this game for them that they're playing, they've got to do this thing, they're participating together, and then they leave your game environment. Don't they just go back to their same old crap that they usually do?
Yeah, well, there is always that worry, right? Kind of the classic, the couple goes into marriage counseling and then go, have a fight on the way home, which you don't want that to happen. Honestly, what we're looking at is, of course, we would love to be able to take more measurements of the impact of this type of approach. So, of course, bankers love data. So we're looking at trying to also innovate the measurement of some of the impact. So, stay tuned for us trying to test and do some more beta tests with that. But some of the most powerful impacts we've seen, I actually had a regulator take a course who, regulators, they basically think about, control the risk, keep a tight lid on everything, and they have a very prescribed approach to how they look at banking. And this regulator said, wow, this changed the way I think. Because, I never thought about the holistic business objectives over the long term. I just thought, I was really thinking about sort of short-term risk control all the time. So to have somebody say to you, this changed how I think, that's a pretty powerful message. So, obviously they could forget it the next day, but the fact that light bulb went on is really good.
So Michelle, your background includes, stints at the International Monetary Fund and other very large organizations involved in thinking about that. Do you think it's necessary for somebody who builds this kind of enterprise training or kind of new way of thinking about changing behavior? Is it necessary for someone to have that depth of experience to be able to do what it is that you've done? Like, could you have done what you're doing if you were just a banker?
Um, not necessarily. I think that what I would say a big takeaway for us over the last year has been that this is a multidisciplinary effort. So our team, we started out as banking subject matter experts, but guess what? Everybody we keep pulling in, we were just talking about that tonight with our team, saying the skill we need is serial learners in our team at BankersLab. So the people I look for, I need you to be a serial learner because you know what? I have the subject matter. We have it already. And we can go get it and we can get help from subject matter experts. The challenge is putting everything together. So you need a good, that good eye for the technology architecture so it's scalable, which is a big thing for us. But then really that serial learner. So, a lot of the folks that I met in the Coursera community had that type of personality. And I think for us, that's been really the crucial kind of skill set that's needed for this. It's that being able to put on different hats and be multidisciplinary.
That's great. And for those of you just joining us, by the way, it's Gabe Zickerman. You're here on the Gamification Revolution. We're chatting with Michelle Katics, founder of BankersLab, doing really interesting things in gamified training and development for the finance industry. And you can catch Michelle, me, dozens of other folks at Gamification Summit in April at gsummit.com and use the code GREV to save and get registered. Really, really interesting, Michelle. We have a lot of questions kind of piling up here in the chat. And here's one from Maries, thank you so much, or Maries. And so the question is, really the question is, how has the gamification pieces of what you've done, the serious games piece, the gamification piece, how is that actually different from what you would do without it? And that is to say, what incremental value is it adding or has it added to the outcomes? Have you measured that even?
Sure. Well, we are embarking on measuring that more, but I'll give you an analogy, which is that we always talk about the serious games, and I'll speak about that first. The serious games are a numerical simulation, right, where you're running your own bank and you have to make all these decisions and see the outcomes. And we always call them flight simulators for bankers because it sounds cool and it gives you the immediate idea of what we're doing. But to be honest, when we talk about at least retail credit portfolios, so you think about a credit card portfolio, a mortgage portfolio, the challenge that we have in that industry is that when those people make a decision today, they have to wait a year or two to see how that went. So the analogy is really, we're actually not really building a flight simulator. We're building a simulator to learn how to drive a big oil tanker. You make a small steering adjustment, you keep driving for 20 miles, and you hope that the current and the wind didn't change too much or changed exactly how you expected during that 20 miles because you already made the steering adjustment and it's too late. So what we see is that the ability for people to have some repetition of make that decision, wait 20 miles, see what happened, do it again, and continue to repeat that process of cause and effect. I can tell you that in the training courses, the difference is night and day in terms of if you just said to somebody, if you do A, B is likely to happen. And they go, oh yeah, okay. But when they really have to do it, it's like explaining riding a bicycle to somebody versus actually getting them to ride it.
Yeah, and so just to follow up on that, and I want to make sure we get to everybody's questions today because there's quite a few. When you sort of talk about that as like a serious game, this sort of serious simulation, my question for you is it actually fun for people to play?
It is. In fact, we did a course in India, and they tend to work late there, so we didn't even finish each day until about 8 p.m. So I was like, wow, you guys, you didn't mind staying late. They're like, no, we don't mind at all. In fact, when we get home, can we still log into the game and keep playing it? Can we do a couple more rounds? And I was like, we're in Bombay. It's going to take you like an hour to get home. Are you serious? So we've had people want to keep playing, and I've actually had to sort of kick people out of the room at 9 or 10 p.m. So yeah, I guess it is fun.
Do you feel like you hold yourself to that standard when you design those things? Like many of the things that you're designing are compulsory things, right? So when you contract with the bank or you contract with the regulator, they bring in BankersLab, people have to do the thing that you do. What about the tension between that I have to do it and that I want to do it piece? How do you resolve that?
Yeah, actually, there is a tension there in the sense that we've worked with some simulations that are really fun, and people want to keep playing them. But as the game designer, we also are educators, and in one case we said, "Hang on a second, they learned everything they're going to learn in the first 10 minutes." So you can't really justify spending all this money as an institution to have people keep playing it for another 2 days. So the push-pull is really to say, okay, is it fun? And I mean, maybe at a bank, life just isn't very interesting, that it's easy to make it fun. And it does seem easy to make it fun. The challenge for us is more to ensure that the learning objectives really pop out. And so then you get into a design challenge of it can't be too tough that people give up, and it can't be too easy that they lose interest. So for us, it's really striking that balance in terms of the scaffolding from the beginning levels and kind of that leveling up, and really striking the right balance in terms of difficulty as people progress.
Do you think has it been unusually hard or challenging to convince banking people that game modalities are useful to them?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I thought it would be tough, and it hasn't been. I was really surprised. Honestly, I thought in Asia this would be easy. We have a lot more millennials and Gen Ys who are actually in managerial positions in banks here. So I thought, oh, that'll be a lot easier. But I have to say, I've been really pleasantly surprised to see baby boomers in the U.S., of that generation, just say, wow, this really works.
What do you have any hypotheses about why that is? Because this is a common discussion we've had here a lot on Gamification Revolution and in other forums and at G Summit, the tension between the generations around gamification. So it's really interesting to hear from someone on the front line like you who says, no, actually, there's a great embrace for this. What do you think that is?
Well, I, I, I think I may be able to thank the new world of apps, and not to sound like an Apple commercial, but some of the fabulous new, the UX and UI people who have really changed the game. I mean, what was it that changed the world that 50 something, 60 somethings will pick up an iPhone and sit and play Angry Birds, where they thought they had no need for technology? I'm sure you've seen people who have had that experience. So I think that the UI and UX world has really sort of teed all this up for us. So I think we would have that community to thank for that.
And of course, in addition, the tireless work of people kind of all around the world, yourself included. I think every time you knock on a door with, gamification or some kind of game modality kind of on your calling card, you're chipping away a little bit at people's preconceived ideas of, what that's about. And there's folks doing the big air cover like Jane, and then there's folks, on the ground doing all this important stuff. So I think it's great. So Seamus, another kind of frequent guest on the show, who actually often is available by video, which any of you could come online. I think we've got Seamus actually by video coming online. Hi, Seamus, can you hear us?
Hi, Jay. Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
I can hear you.
So Seamus, this was a really interesting question that you had. I put it up here. Do you want to ask it in your own words, Michelle?
Sure. I was just wondering if especially when you're trying to use games with bankers, if you're using metacognition at all. In other words, how one thinks about their thinking, to put it kind of lightly and not too heavily academic.
Your sound is really soft, but I think I got you. Yeah, I think in the serious games. Yeah, can you say that one more time to make sure I got it?
Sure.
Was, oh, there you go. Go for it, Seamus. Go for it.
I was wondering if you guys were using metacognition when you were trying to impart the learning environments that you need via the games, the metacognition being how one thinks about one's thinking.
Yeah, honestly, I would say that, I've been running these serious games myself for about 4 or 5 years, and I would say that that's always been part of the way I frame it with people informally, but I think that is something that should be probably brought more to the formal forefront because, to be honest, I was running this simulation myself quite a bit before we scaled up and made it a scalable application. And now that we are scaling out to other instructors and institutions, I mean, that's something, really the question is how do you formalize that, right? You can sort of address that in debriefs in the class and the way you talk to people, but what's a powerful way to formalize that?
I was thinking more along
Thanks.
the lines of how you use it, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Seamus. See you soon. Maybe on the streets of New York, even if we're lucky. Yeah, very, very interesting. Well, and actually to that point, kind of, Michelle, just to kind of key off Seamus's question for a second. So risk is an inherent part of every aspect of our lives, right? Like we all are making risk decisions every time we step out off the curb, every time we choose to eat something, sleep with somebody, and then these big picture kind of risk things. And you've spent a really big chunk of your life thinking about risk, and many of the products that you've designed at BankersLab are about the process of risk and thinking about risk and thinking about it differently. What are some of the most important sort of takeaways about teaching the concept of something like risk management to people that we can impart, that are imparted now through this gamified modality?
That's a great question. I think that one of the things that does come through to people when you teach with this modality is that you teach risk as a trade-off. So, for example, when we're in a serious game, it's all about the people playing the game are looking for inflection points in the data. It's all about trade-offs. So, for example, in one game, they actually inherit a really risky portfolio. So your initial reaction is to pull back and say, okay, I'm going to get more conservative to clean house. But actually, you've got to keep getting new business. You've got to bring in more healthy business to kind of put it into the mix to pay for the losses that you have inherited. So that really teaches people that it's about looking at trade-offs and tipping points and inflection points. It's not just a simple, you can just control everything. Because, the joke is, how do you make sure you don't lose any money? Well, you just don't lend any money, and that's not a great solution, right? And obviously, lending too much money, which we saw caused a crisis, is also not. So the question is, how do you teach people to recognize the point at which they should see that inflection point in the data, see the inflection point, not just in data, but also just around them in the world, to recognize where is the right place to strike that balance.
Well, and isn't that kind of interesting, right, and really unique to the game modality in a sense, because as you described it before, as and I think in many work environments, the compliance versus business side are meant to be in opposition. The compliance people going full board, no, 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 and the business people going yes, yes, yes. And the idea is that somehow that opposing viewpoint produces the ideal result, like in the court system in the United States, right, the adversarial model. But in fact, I guess what you're saying is that's actually not the right way to do it, right?
I mean, I think, it's one of those things where you do want the compliance people to, it's one of those, walk a mile in my shoes type of situation. So it is fun to have somebody who's been of a serious compliance mindset for a long time, and then have them play the game, and they have to make money or they lose, and they're really embarrassed. So how are you going to make money? Well, you're going to have to relax a couple constraints here and there and choose wisely. And then you take the business people and you're like, well, if you take too aggressive an approach, you'll lose a lot of money and be embarrassed. So it is a little bit of sort of, just that simple thing of seeing things from another person's viewpoint, and they actually come to value the other side of the table and say, okay, I still need you to keep arguing for that and pulling your weight, on the teeter-totter.
Teeter-totter is such an interesting metaphor. So we've got a question he's been waiting for a while from Rajagopalan. Thanks, Rajagopalan, for the question, which is, and he also asked in chat a different question, but what areas of banking have worked out the best for Bankers Lab, and what hasn't worked? And what can you say about why some areas are receptive to the gamification approach and some areas may not be as receptive?
I think for us, we've been focused on the retail risk management area. I would say it's been going really well. It's gotten a great reception. In terms of what's not gone well, it's not that there isn't something that hasn't worked so far. We're the kind of startup that we've continued to pivot as we've seen, really good demand and sort of interest in certain areas. I think a challenge, I would say, is that there are some serious compliance issues we need to consider. So for example, these days when you do training, it's like, okay, we're not messing around anymore. Like the regulators require that bankers at all levels have certain training courses that they've completed in compliance and all these other things. So, the idea is that when we're gamifying, it's super serious because many of these courses, by the way, will end up being used for a certification process. In fact, the first time I ever used these sims was part of an internal certification process for an organization. So that part, it's not that it hasn't worked, it's just been that, people, they see the value of a gamification. And when you have a serious game, I think that they see that, they actually see it's actually a very powerful way to integrate into the certification process. It's when we talk about like the Gamified Classroom and Gamified this and Gamified that, where it's not as serious, then I think the certification part might have trouble merging in with that.
Speaking of kind of serious overlaps with fun, so simulation games are a pretty popular way of dealing with some of the, I get asked about this a lot, like every week, help us build a simulation game for this enterprise, to model out these different business scenarios. Do you take any of your inspiration from, mainstream simulation games, things like SimCity or Civilization or any of those other kind of like big simulation games?
Honestly, for the not so much for the lab products, but now that we're gamifying the mobile learning, which isn't so much of a serious game, our mobile learning products are very much around, here's all this boring terminology, some technical stuff you guys have to learn. So honestly, I sit and download so many games, I have to keep deleting them because my phone is full, because there's so much inspiration out there. The world is my oyster to say, okay, sorry guys, yeah, some of this material is boring, but look at all these great game mechanics out there that we can apply to this to at least, make it fun for you guys to learn this stuff. So I'd say in the mobile area, that's really where I'm inspired.
So that's really interesting. So you take this inspiration by playing all these different games. Do you have you found yourself ever, or have you guys worked on anything that you think was just a sort of dud that really didn't, like a concept or a set of mechanics that you tried that just really doesn't work in this environment at all, or are we still too new for that?
I think honestly that the area that we're struggling with, and other people are as well, is the Gamified Classroom. There have been some books out on this, and they've been experimenting in the university setting. But basically, if you're still teaching in a normal context, really to get those game mechanics right is incredibly difficult. And we'll be doing lots of user testing and beta testing with that. Because we do just want to take this content and make it so much more engaging and accessible to people. But not every topic that we teach is appropriate to have a serious game or a simulation. So let's gamify the classroom. So I think that, that piece is incredibly challenging.
Yeah, it definitely does sound like that. And of course, we've been here with Michelle Katics from BankersLab. And you can follow BankersLab on Twitter at BankersLab. And of course, you're knee deep in one of the toughest subjects, probably, I would say certainly of all the guests that we've had. Gosh, I couldn't imagine a subject less fun and interesting on the surface than banking compliance, but you're having great success gamifying it. And you can come hear Michelle, myself, and dozens of others talk about the things that work and the things that didn't live and in person at Gamification Summit this April 16th through the 18th in San Francisco. For more information about it, it's gsummit.com, and you can use the code GREV to save on that and guarantee your place at the conference. My advanced workshop is sold out and in waitlist mode only, but if you're interested in joining us, be sure to add yourself to the waitlist so you can get on board. And in the meantime, I want to thank you so very much, Michelle, for joining us from Chiang Mai today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks everybody else for joining us here on the Gamification Revolution Spreecast from all around the world. Hope to see you again next week when we'll have another great guest talking about different aspects of creating engagement. And in the meantime, keep having fun.